Hello. Hello. There we go. Okay, this last summer, my partner and I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail. So the AT runs 2,189 miles from Springer, Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And a thru-hike means you hike the whole damn thing in one calendar year. Now, most hikers start in Georgia and hike to Maine, and that's called northbounding, and they're called nobos. But because of the rising popularity of backpacking, there are thousands of hikers starting in the south every March, and it's killing the trail. It overruns the trail towns, it straps the resources, it fills the privies, and is generally too much for the resources that are there. So we decided to do an alternative through hike called a flip-flop, where you start somewhere in the middle, and then you hike to the end, and then you go back and you finish it the other way. We started in a little town called Bland, Virginia, which really lived up to its name. And on April 2nd, we began our through hike. You can see how shiny we are in that first picture. And we hiked north because we still wanted mostly a Nobo experience, but we wanted to avoid the crowds and the norovirus and the usual mental blocks and things that northbounders face. And also, we didn't want to be in the south in the snow. Although, we did get snow, which we were totally unprepared for because we were snotty northerners who thought the south was warm all the time. So on our fourth day, we put socks on our hands and soldiered on. The first 2 weeks were definitely the hardest. I had knee pain, we got blisters, we had to get used to the whole routine of it. We had to build up to get our trail legs, which is when you can just like get up and go in the morning. And everything we needed, we carried on our backs. Our packs ranged from 12 to 35 pounds, depending on how much food and water we had. Every 3 to 5 days, we would walk into a town and buy groceries. Every 5 to 7 days, we would go to a motel and shower and do laundry so that we could stand to sleep in a small tent together. And eventually, we got better at it. And doing an alternative hike was really great. In Virginia, there were no leaves on the trees, so we got sunburned in the woods. But it wasn't so bad. And about 300 miles in, we reached Shenandoah National Park, where we learned a major lesson. We got there and had been hearing nothing but how great the views were. And we got there and it was 40 degrees and raining, and we couldn't see a thing. You couldn't see 30 feet in front of you. So we bailed. We went into town, we ate an ungodly amount of fried chicken, and then we got back on when the sun shined. And this is called hiking your own hike, which is a mantra of the AT. I did this needlepoint for a friend named Sniffles. The trail name is also an important tradition. Mine is Home Ec, because I needlepoint. I taught another hiker how to sew. And then Ian became Hot Pants because he melted a hole in his shorts at a famously terrible hostel in Pennsylvania on a personal heater. So at this point, we're hiking 20 to 25 miles every day. And people are like, how do you do that? And it's because literally there's nothing else to do. You get up in the morning with the sun, and you hike until the sun goes down, and then you have to go to bed at 9, which is called backpacker midnight. And while I have a lot of pictures of views, the actual experience of the AT is the woods. We've walked by probably 1 billion trees, in the rain, in the fog, in the sleet, in the morning, in the nighttime, in the sun, in the clouds. You just walk and walk and walk in the woods. And by the time we got to Vermont, 1,000 miles later, we were really tired of it and took 3 weeks off. It was good to be back on the long trail, but we needed a break. They say that the first half of the AT is physical and the second half is mental, and we did find that to be true. But then we took a break, we ate as much as we could, we went to a wedding, we cleaned up, and when we got back on, we were in the whites. When you hike the AT, your perspective really changes. Some people call this Mount Washington, but because there's a cafeteria on the top, we call it Mount Hot Dog Kingdom. And that's what I remember the best. And The whites are notoriously rugged, but more rugged is Maine. Southern Maine is the hardest hiking I've ever done, but also the most spectacular. And because we were off-season, we got there a little ahead and were able to go swimming every day in July, where most northbounders get there in October. So we summited Katahdin, which is the northern terminus, on August 16th, and at that point we had gone 1,600 miles, so we had completed our northern flip. And then we went back down to Bland, Virginia, good old Bland, and we started our southern flop, and we started hiking southbound or Sobo. And because it was off-season, there was nobody there, and on one day we saw more bears than people, which was great and not great at the same time. But because we had hiked with so many nobos in the first place, we got great advice, like make sure you camp out on the Grayson Highlands, where actual baby ponies will frolic around you at 5,000 feet at sunset. That really happened to me. So that was a wonderful thing about the alternative hike. When we finally got to the Smoky Mountains, the hurricanes also got to the Smoky Mountains, and we had to do a small kerflippity flop of rearranging and reorganizing and replanning to be able to do the whole thing, to not be up there in the worst weather. But we did it, and you can't tell how frightened I am in this picture, but that cliff goes straight down. So we were hiking in the south, and suddenly, after hiking 1,000 miles, 500 miles isn't so much, and we're counting down, and I realized that every day I had been drawing on myself to keep going, and suddenly I was looking at a day when I would have to not keep going anymore. So reflecting on my hike, we'd gone through 4 pairs of shoes each at this point. We're coming up on the last 100 miles. We hiked 100 miles in our last week in 5 days because we were trying to get our flights. And I just kept thinking about how grateful I was that we had done an alternative through hike. We'd gotten great weather, we'd had great experiences. And when we got to Springer Mountain, the southern terminus, on September 23rd and became through hikers, I was only grateful that I had hiked my own hike and done an alternative through hike. And we are now through hikers, and only 1 in 4 hikers who start actually finish it. And if you're going to do a through hike, I highly recommend choosing an alternative method. Thank you.